Hello everyone, my name is Dustin and you're watching my channel Steeplehead Studios. We're going to continue our series on walking through the Hail Caesar rulebook. This is part 3. Today we're going to be looking at the basic sequences of play. Before we get into that, I have a question for you. Which of these two books is different? Or are they the same? I recently discovered that this book here, with a sleeve on it, was a book written and printed before 2015. It came with the old Gaul, I think it's Invasion of Gaul, or the Gaul and Imperial Roman starter box, which isn't really historically accurate because by the time the Imperial Romans are running around, Gaul is already subdued. So this is an older printed book and there's typos and mistakes in it, and that affected some of my gameplay in the past. However, I did get my hands on a book printed after 2015 and the typos have been addressed. All the mistakes are fixed from what I've seen. So from now on, I was using the old book for this series. There shouldn't be anything wrong with part 1 or part 2. I looked through and they look pretty much identical. It's in part 3 here that there were some differences and I had to clarify. If you have the old book and you don't agree with my rules, perhaps we should double check them, because some of the rules do change how you might read or perceive how the rules are played in a game. Alright, so without further ado, let's get right into part 3. So you got all your models, you got all your things, you figured out formations. Now we're going to look at how to set up a battlefield. Here we have a roughly a little bigger than a 6 by 4 foot table with a cigar box battle mat on it. And you see I've got all this terrain spread out on it now. We'll talk about terrain later. But you're basically going to set up the field in a way that both you and your opponents, or one person, however you want to set it up, is suitable for a game. Even just a flat ground with no terrain would work fine if you're new and you just want to get used to the rules. But I put this in kind of a forested area with kind of a clearing in the middle and just some open spaces along the sides. Basically, Hail Caesar is a fight between two players. You got, let's say, the Numidians over here as a blue team, and my Romans here are the red team. Typically it'll be a two-player game, but you know, maybe other people want to play. Maybe you got 4 people and you want to have 2 armies fighting each other. The brilliant thing in Hail Caesar is you have divisions. Right now I've got 2 divisions on the field. I've got 1 division on the Roman side, 1 division on the Numidian side over there. If I had more divisions and 4 players, each person could take control of a commander or the general and control their own division. So Hail Caesar, depending on how many divisions and soldiers and such you have in the game, can easily become a 1 versus 1 game, or 2 versus 1, or 2 versus 2 game, depending on how many divisions you have. You might also want, if someone doesn't want to play, have an umpire in there, and the rulebook goes on to about umpires and people on the side who kind of make shots and make some rule calls, but I find most games do not need them. So Hail Caesar has no specific rules on how you're supposed to set up the board. As long as you got a flat surface and you and your friends agree on the terrain, and you can even make your own scenarios, you have a lot of liberty to do what you want in Hail Caesar. One thing that the rulebook does say, though, is that you should at least have your forces 3 feet apart when playing. And you'll see later in the movement that's reasonable to have. But these guys are a bit more than 3 feet. This is more closer to 4 feet or something like that. So that's typically how a table might look. If I had more forces, they'd probably span across the edge of the table here, and the other side would be the same. So when you're getting started on playing, you're gonna have to figure out who sets up first, who goes first. It doesn't matter how you do it. I mean, if we set these up, let's say that we flipped a coin and I won heads, I set up my Romans first, I decided, and then my friends set up their Numidians. It doesn't really matter. You can use whatever method you want to set up your forces. Let's say we roll some dice here. Who gets the highest? The Romans rolled a 6. The Numidians rolled a 6. Look at that. So what happens? Re-roll, and I guess in my situation, 6 for the Romans, 1. So the Romans here go first. And it's that simple, setting up the game. Now each person, and here we've got red, Numidians are blue, whoever goes first gets 3 phases before you switch to the other person's turn. Basically, the Romans now, starting out, go into something called the command phase. The command phase has two parts. There is the initiative part of the command phase, where initiative orders come first before commands, and then the second part of the command phase would be the, here we go with the commander. The commanders or generals give their whole divisions orders. The command phase is where you're doing all your moving and all your orders, and we'll get to that very soon. After your command phase is completely done, we go into the second phase, which is the shooting phase. And obviously, if you have ranged attacks with your forces, that's when you're going to be unleashing them. And we'll talk more about the shooting phase later on, and ranged attacks. And the last phase that is in part of a turn would be the combat phase. And the combat phase, every turn is fought by both sides. So if these guys are in combat fighting with someone over there, both units will get a chance to fight. And we'll talk more about that when we actually get to the combat phase. Measuring in the game is very straightforward. You can anytime measure. You can measure at any time you want. So it's my opponent's turn right now, and he's moving his troops. And I'm just like, okay, it's not my turn, but I just want to know how many inches away these trees are over here. Okay, let's say I want to know how far these trees are. I can measure any time. 21 inches. So measuring in the game is straightforward. You can measure any time, out of your turn, in your turn. It's not rude to start measuring things when your opponent's moving all his forces. You might be curious where he's going. So don't worry about measuring. Measure anytime, anywhere, and it's all good for shooting, for moving, anything like that. As for where to measure from, there's two basic spots that you're going to be measuring from in the game. For all units, it's base-to-base measurement. So if my base is here and his base is there, and I want to see, am I in range to charge? In this case I am, 6 inches. I measure from the edge of my base to the edge of the opponent's base. Pretty simple, right? The other spot you're going to be doing measuring from is from commanders. They don't use the base. All commanders use their heads. You measure from their head to the unit's base for orders and commands. So that's the two spots in the game you're measuring from the commander's head for the command phase, and then everything else is going to be a base-to-base measurement. Another quick aspect here we have to remember in the game is unit visibility. What can a unit see and where can a unit see from? So here in the middle, we've got this group of Astati, which are obviously facing that way. And in this picture here, there's 3 scenarios. We've got these guys up here, which are clearly in their front. These guys here, which are behind them. And then I don't know if you noticed or not, but there's an elephant. There's its rider in the howdah back there. There's an elephant behind those woods there. So, with the Romans facing here, and considering visibility, common sense would tell you that, okay, there's some dense woods here, depending on how thick the trees are. In this case, we're going to say that they're quite dense. The only unit that this guy can see is obviously this one here. Okay, they can't see what's behind them, they can't see what's through the woods. These guys are facing the Romans, so they can see them. These Numidians can see the Romans, and this elephant cannot see the Romans because there's woods in his way. So it's pretty straightforward, easy to understand things. When we talk about visibility in Hail Caesar, all visibility is measured from the center front or from the leader of a unit. Now, in this particular small unit of Hastati, I do not have a leader really, so for him, I'd measure from just the center front, wherever it lies. So basically for a unit, whatever the leader or whatever the center front is facing and can see, then that's what the whole unit can see. It doesn't matter if, say, Bob here can see the elephant. The fact is that his leader doesn't see it. If only Bob sees it, then doesn't matter. The leader doesn't see it, he's not gonna, the rest of the unit doesn't see it. So it doesn't matter if like 2 soldiers here can see something the rest of the unit can't see. All sight, all visibility is measured from the center front. I don't care if this guy here can see something over yonder that the leader can't see. You have to check visibility from the center front. If the leader or the center front of the unit cannot see something, then it just cannot see it. That's how Hail Caesar works for shooting, for charging, for pretty much everything. And it should be mentioned that units cannot see through other units, including, this also includes skirmishers. So, if my fellows here for visibility and line of sight, say these skirmishers are here, and the skirmishers, they have a frontage of they have a 360-degree frontage. They don't have a front. They can see like everywhere here. They could see, the skirmishers here can see these guys behind them because they don't have a set front. But the skirmishers there are actually blocking the visibility of the hostati here, despite there being gaps from the open order there. So other units will block visibility. Your own units will block visibility, and enemies will block visibility as well. So that's very important for things like shooting, because if you got a bunch of skirmishers here and I want to throw my Pila, I can't throw Pila because there are skirmishers blocking my visibility. And we're about to go into the commander phase here, but for seeing things, commanders simply don't have any visibility. There's no point to measure from it. You'll see when we get into the command phase coming up here that you simply don't worry about the visibility of commanders. They don't see things. They're not actually really there until they get involved in a unit, but we'll get into that later. Now, the only exception in Hail Caesar where a unit would be able to see over something would be artillery. Now, artillery we'll get to later, but if artillery is a certain distance between a friendly unit and an enemy unit, artillery is the only exception where they could use visibility to shoot over friends. Nothing else can shoot over friends. Nothing else can see through friendly or enemy units. So remember that. It's important to remember that it's the center front of a unit that can see something. For skirmishers, what can they see? You know what? For our games, we just pick the model, because I don't think there really is a leader in a skirmisher unit, and whatever's around them they can see, right? They don't really have a front. So for skirmishers, there's really no center front to measure from. It's just basically whatever's around them that they can see, whereas formed units will always be center front for measuring visibility.